for time's sake, I also want to let you guys know that I'm going to have my colleagues on here today. We're going to have Rocio Muñante, who's our network and training manager, but we are also going to be having Dr. Eddie Ramirez here, who is a dentist, and they're going to be taking care of the chat. So there's going to be so much that I am going to be like just going really quickly through. But I want to encourage all of you to put questions in the chat. We are going to have Rocio and Dr. Ramirez answering some of those questions as we move forward. And then we're also going to take caption or take a picture of all of those comments that came in or those questions. And we're going to try our hardest to also send over answers to those questions if we're not able to get to them within the next hour. And I'm also happy to stay behind if anybody wants to stay behind after the hour is done and chat a little bit more. But just to introduce myself, I know I just started speaking on behalf of the presentation, but my name is Yari Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of Pre-Health Dreamers. We have been working really hard, our team, to be able to bring this information. It took a lot of research. It took a lot of talking to students, but also talking to administrators about what's going on, not just in dentistry, but in other programs, and what has worked in other programs such as medicine, to be able to now move forward and have these conversations with dental schools. But today you're here to really talk about creating financial aid support for undocumented students in dentistry. Let me just, if you guys are new to Pre-Health Dreamers, let me just share a little bit of who we are. We just had our 10-year anniversary last year, and so we are 10 years old unofficially. Even though our founders were doing a lot of the work, they were students in the UC system here in California. They were undocumented pursuing medicine and really couldn't find a lot of the answers and support that they needed, even though we were California. So they took it upon themselves to create Pre-Health Dreamers. It was a student organization. And they were doing a lot of the research, a lot of the conversations until they were picked up by Immigrants Rising and became a project of theirs. Later on, we detached ourselves and now we became our own nonprofit or our own project. And really what we do is we work with undocumented students pursuing health professional programs. We do a lot of advising, advocacy training, because self-advocacy is key. It's really a lifeline as they're pursuing higher education and beyond. But we also do a lot of trainings for institutions and a lot of just resource sharing. And so that's just a little bit of what Pre-Health Dreamers is. And I just want to give a little bit of overview and background onto why we're tackling dentistry programs now, why we're wanting to work more with dentistry programs. Since 2012, and again, before that, our co-founders, you can see on the top left, you'll see Neil, Angel, and Denise, when they were just students trying to create Pre-Health Dreamers as juniors and seniors in higher education, trying to find all of the answers. But because they were pursuing medicine, a lot of the research, a lot of the trainings, a lot of the awareness was around medical school. And they did work a lot with the AAMC to be able to open up a lot of the resources, or just like the financial aid application, open it up to undocumented students, especially DACA recipients. They also did a lot of advocacy around SB 1159, which is in California. It's our law that allows undocumented individuals to apply for their professional license. So here they can be dentists, doctors, lawyers, nurses, and so on, regardless of their immigration status. We also do a lot around Health for All. California now has Health for All. We always try to expand to other states and try to help efforts in other states as well. So let us know if you ever need some insight on how things were done here in California. But again, they did a lot of training, a lot of advising. So Pre-Health Dreamers does have a long history in advocating and implementing programs, but it was very much medicine focused. A few years ago, we've always had dental students coming to us, but we really did see an increase in the last few years, which is why now we are also trying to focus on more of the dental schools and also nursing. We have a huge rise in nursing students, a huge rise in PA, physician assistants, and physical therapy. Dentistry is number 2, though, after medicine. So we are really trying to tackle kind of like the questions that we have, questions students have, questions that administrators and counselors at dental schools have. We really have been trying to do a lot of the research. 2 years ago, we sent out an intake to dental schools. You may have been somebody who submitted the answers to this or not, or this might sound familiar to you. But we sent out an intake to all of the most of the dental schools across the US. We sent it out to 71 dental schools. 39 schools responded. We really wanted to get a feel of where the schools were at right now in as far as supporting undocumented students, admitting undocumented students, and so on. So out of those 39 schools that did respond, 72% says yet that they take DACA recipients. 28% said they do not take DACA recipients. With that said, we also know that even less schools take undocumented students without DACA and without TPS. Rocio is going to put on the chat, if you are new to this language of DACA, TPS, or individuals without socials. In a little bit, if she hasn't done it already, Rocio will be putting on the chat what those terms mean as we move forward, because I will be using them interchangeably. At Pre-Health Dreamers, we work with we actually work with 4 populations. We work with DACA recipients. We work with undocumented individuals that don't have DACA. We also work with individuals that have TPS, but we also work a lot with refugee and asylum seekers, just because they're in that kind of world right now where they may have a social and work permit or they won't, but they don't necessarily have a visa. So sometimes schools also don't know how to work with them. But this survey that we sent out to dental schools, it was primarily to kind of get a feel of how dental schools were working with undocumented students. Some of the things that we saw, some common trends, what we're calling a little bit of barriers on the end of the student side, is that a lot of schools consider DACA recipients international. They also don't consider DACA as a legal status, which technically it isn't. But a lot of folks also didn't know that DACA recipients do have a social security number, which you can get a background check from. And also a lot of folks were really like, I really support students by sending them over to the financial aid office. So on our end, as we're talking to students, there's sometimes a big disconnect between the financial aid resources and the support that they're really in need of. So as we move forward in this conversation today, we're going to be talking about how to overcome the barriers as an administrator, as a school in general, or even as a task force. So hang tight for that. Just reminder, we have Dr. Eddie Ramirez in the house here today. Say hi, Eddie. Hi. And then we also have Rocio. And again, feel free to put any questions that you have within the chat. They're going to be going in and answering some of those questions just to move us along a little bit faster. So I want to come to you guys kind of in the way that I know that establishing financial aid or institutional aid is very challenging. I used to work in higher education. I started an emergency grant for undocumented students in our campus. And even in California, this was a really big task to take on, especially because I was not an administrator. I was not an AVP. I was not even a director at the time. I was simply a lot of work under me, but I was really an advisor, an admissions advisor. That's who I was, and I was facing student after student, not really knowing how to navigate the system. I was also a resident specialist, so I saw a lot of students really having a hard time navigating the admissions component of it all. And so I just network within the campus until I was finally able to get really good partnership with some of those folks that did have the decision or the authority to make decisions, or those individuals that were stakeholders. So I hit a lot of barriers, but I did not stop. I also want to acknowledge that I do understand that a lot of you guys in your schools will be hitting a lot of challenges, but I want to have that conversation today and encourage you guys to keep going because it definitely is worth it. But I know that you guys are going to have a lot of red tape as you move forward. A lot of institutions um, have a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions on how you can fundraise, how you can allocate funding as it's coming in. Especially, I know based on campuses, I really, as an admissions counselor, really didn't have much of a say. When I was a director in higher education, my hands were still very much tied with a lot of the things that I can do. And so things might work a little bit different in your institution. You're probably you could be a smaller institution, a larger private, public, and it's all going to vary a little bit of how you're going to be working, but we're going to try to cover all of that today. Some of the stuff that also might create challenges is campus politics. I've been there, campus culture. We don't even have to talk about the national political climate. Sometimes it's just campus culture on its own. Also, a lot of times we as even administrators, even as directors, we don't know how the foundation office works. We don't know about grants out there. We don't know how to, we're not even allowed to do fundraising sometimes. So there definitely is a wide range of challenges that I understand and I know that all of you guys may be facing. And I definitely also know that we are not like medical schools, right? Sometimes, a lot of times, medical schools might have more funding or maybe receiving more donors than dental schools. But I really want you guys to be a little bit open today. And what is it that we can do?
And Yadi, I'm so sorry to interrupt one more time. I think I was looking through, accidentally clicked something, so your screen's no longer sharing. Would you mind unsharing and sharing one more time, please?
Yes.
And I apologize for that. Let me just make sure that we're seeing what you're seeing too. Thank you. Yes, I can see everything again.
It now? Okay, great. Thank you, Rocio. So let's talk about goal setting. And please know if we have time, I'm going to try to go as fast as possible. So if we have time at the end, we'll have kind of like a Q&A, or we can do more of a discussion based on the things that are up on your screen today. Um, but I think one of the most important things, whether you're a small school, a private, a public, and so on, is really understanding and assessing what is it that we can do as a campus. Most importantly, how can we get started and who are our key players that are going to be part of this? Even before I was with Pre-Health Dreamers, I've been able to lead a lot of task forces. Usually they're called task forces. They're leading a lot of the efforts around undocumented students or other really kind of needs that are kind of popping up around their campus. And so I've led a couple of task forces. And so I really know how important it is to have goals, because people come and go, people leave, new people come in with new ideas. So it's really important to do goal setting and know what your campus is, what their capacity is, what is your capacity, what is your staff's capacity in order to start moving forward. So I always encourage folks to get together, do goal setting. And one of the big things that I tell individuals also is you don't always have to create a lot of new things. A lot of things that are needed by the student are already at your campus. What we want to assess and ensure is that the information or the resources that are available at your campus, have we assessed them and are they available to undocumented students, whether they have DACA or not, or whether they're a TPS holder. So this is one of the quickest things, the easiest goals that you guys can set in the beginning. Make sure that all of the scholarships within your departments or any department that's setting out a scholarship, that we ensure that they are not adding a US citizen or permanent residency requirement. Now, if that opportunity or that resource is federally funded, we have a different story. But if that funding is in no way tied to federal funding, we should be able to research and really assess if we're able to remove that US citizenship cosign or that US citizenship um, requirement from there. That is one of the easiest things that a team can do. A lot of times undocumented students say, we really don't want anything new. We just want to have available what is available to everybody else. Also, another really, a little bit quicker than not, it's really assessing your financial aid counselors. Are they up to date to all of the different language that we are using when we're working with undocumented students? Do we know the difference between institutional aid, federal aid, and what is available to the students and how we can help them? Do we know how to work with a student who is undocumented, yet they submitted a FAFSA? Do we know that we can actually go into the system and pull it out, and so we can assess that student's EFC? So all of these different things are things we need to ensure that our financial aid counselors are up to par with. That's another goal that a lot of times folks set. It's just really training our staff and faculty to ensure that they're up to date with all of the different processes that are supportive of undocumented students within our campuses. One thing I want to bring up is that a lot of students always share like, oh yes, I applied and I asked if somebody, I asked about financial aid and I was just sent to the financial aid office. The financial aid counselor or the director just gave me a list of scholarships to complete. That was the support that I got. If that is what your campus can do, that is fine for now. What we are also asking though is that before you send over that list, it is really important that we are vetting those scholarships. A lot of times what happens is we'll send the student a scholarship with 10, 15, 20, 30 scholarships in one list. When they go through the first 5 or 10, they'll see the US citizenship requirement. They'll see the permanent residency requirement. So after the 5th or 10th one that they go through, more than likely our students are going to shut down. It has nothing to do with them being responsible or irresponsible or adults or too young for this kind of experience. What it basically is, it's sometimes a trauma response. So for decades, a lot of times undocumented students have been hearing, you don't qualify. You don't qualify. So when they get a list of like 30 scholarships and the first 5 or 10 have that citizenship requirement, in their mind, they're going to say, oh, all of these are going to be for US citizens. So it's really important that as staff, we're going in and assessing and like really vetting them before we send them over. And really advocating if that scholarship does have a US citizenship requirement, can we advocate at that department who's giving away the scholarship to ask why and can it be removed? Creating a task force, another really easier than not goal that folks can make at their campuses. What we want to ensure that its stakeholders are included within these task force. A lot of times I've led task force where it's sometimes advisors, which is great because they're the ones that are with their hands rolled up, talking to students on a daily basis. They will really have a grasp of what the needs are. But we also need folks that are able to take that task force into another level and really be able to make change happen. Again, as an advisor myself in higher education, my hands were really tied, or I had to kind of advocate a lot harder than somebody else who can really just make those decisions. Another big thing that folks can do that I have found really helpful within Pre-Health Dreamers is really just bringing awareness. Really just bringing folks up to speed on what is going on within our campus. Who are our students? What are their needs? Did we even know this was going on? A lot of times really bringing awareness will take you a long way. Educating folks, educating others. Also, I encourage all of you guys, if you guys don't have somebody who is familiar with the needs of undocumented students, there's a lot of organizations like us, like President's Alliance, Dream.us, United We Dream. And there might be some in your area, or other campuses who have done this before, who are already doing trainings, who may be able to support you in hosting a training for your staff to bring everybody up to par. And also allow a lot of folks from different departments into that task force. You're going to need financial aid there. You're going to need admissions. You're going to need recruitment. You're going to need your pre-health advisors. You're also going to need deans. Again, we're going to need folks that can really make change happen. One other thing I really want to push for, and I know sometimes it takes time to like be open to working with community, but sometimes bringing in community members can help your resources stretch out further, or your voice of the task force stretch out further. What do I mean by that? Again, we go back to the restrictions sometimes that we have at our schools, right? I had to work with a lot of outside organizations that can come in and support. And one of the examples that I have, I'll tell it now instead of later, but one of the examples that I had for goal setting, we were looking for financial support for our students, right? I had to figure out how to create a emergency grant. I had to go through all of these type of red tape and talk to folks left and right. All of that is time consuming. I met somebody from a nonprofit out in the community, and they had a scholarship that was available. Like they wanted to start a scholarship. So I simply said, hey, can you make that scholarship for our Cal State students at this specific campus? And they said yes. So they were doing the fundraising for me. They were doing the application process. All I had to do was share the application with our undocumented students on our campus. They did all of the work. So while I was having the conversations of how can I set up institutional support for our students, or institutional financial support like scholarships, emergency grants, and so on, can I have some allies out in the community who are already have something set up support our efforts? Another, there's so much more goal setting that can happen. This is a little bit more advanced for some folks, and it takes a little bit more, but you can always also hire somebody. I want to encourage you guys to choose liaisons or hire staff that are really going to advocate and really understand what it means to be undocumented or to have that undocumented experience. And I want to encourage folks to really, if you're hiring a staff, to make this a director position. If your initial goal is to make it a coordinator because of funding, that's fine. But as somebody who was overseeing Dream Centers and undocumented student programs, that staff member is going to do sometimes the work of a director or even higher than that. As a sometimes counselor or advisor at a Dream Center, you're doing a lot of counseling therapy without even realizing. You're doing a lot of leading a lot of projects, doing fundraising, doing teams. So I think it's really important that you pick the right person, but also pay them. So always take that into consideration when you're doing your fundraising or trying to allocate funds for a specific Dream Center program that you are leading. Um, Also, you can also start with a smaller goal, right? And we'll talk about the different levels of maybe like a percentages that you can offer students based on the tuition of your school. But really, every year you can start at a smaller amount while you're trying to fundraise, while you're trying to figure out all the ins and outs of how to do a scholarship, or how to partner with somebody who already has a scholarship, and then increase every year. So these are goals that are really important. They can get you started. We're going to send these your way so you have them. Most importantly, regardless of what your goals are, I think it's really important that you are very transparent with students. If you don't have the funding just yet, or you're just getting started, let them know that. Just say, hey, we are accepting DACA recipients or undocumented students, but at this time we don't have financial aid, or we only have this percentage, and that's what we're capped at for this year. So that will allow the student to make that decision whether or not they can continue on with that school or not. There might be another school who might have more capacity or financial support. So it's really important that we are open with the student while we're also working to meet some of the goals that we set. Some of this goal setting can be a semester goal. Some of these goal settings can be a year, or even a 5-year goal. But I think it's really important to put that goal down on paper, create a task force that's going to be able to take care of it, and do check-ins that will allow you to kind of measure where you are within that goal setting. One of the other things that really comes up when we are working with students pursuing dentistry, and this goes for a lot of different programs, even medicine, which we've been talking to for a very long time, is when students are being enrolled or matriculated as domestic versus international. So for a very long time, I have been an advocate of we're going to be bringing in undocumented students as domestic because I have the California mentality. In California, we group TPS, DACA recipients, and students without any type of protection under domestic. In California and other states, DACA recipients, undocumented, and TPS holders also get in-state tuition and in-state financial aid. So in my mind, for a very long time, I thought everybody was doing that. When I started working with Pre-Health Dreamers, I realized, and we're at national level, I realized that some schools do put their undocumented students as international, which in a way it's fine it's not, as long as it's not affecting the student. However, we have seen it affect a lot of students in various ways. So one of the things that we've noticed with students being coded or enrolled as international students is that they do not meet this financial escrow requirement. So first of all, when a student is undocumented, they may or may not have a social. They may or may not qualify for state or federal aid, and they may have been in the US for a short period of time. So that's how they are similar with international students. But on the other end, international students have an F1 visa. They may or may not have a social security number because F1 visas cannot just get a social security number, they have to apply for it. But one of the big differences, I go back to this. Undocumented students, if we are enrolling students as international, more than likely, we're already denying the student up front, and we are also probably denying them the chance to apply for any institutional aid, unless you are a school that says we will enroll you as international, but we're not going to put all of the restrictions or add all of the requirements that we do to an international student. We've also seen that happen. So if you are coding your international student and you're also requiring this financial escrow requirement, that could be putting the student in a really bad spot. Also, putting the student as an international student will also sometimes make students feel, one, that they're othered, and because they're othered, they cannot apply to any other type of funding. So scholarships are close to them, just like with some international students. They don't belong in the same realm as domestic students. So in reality, undocumented students may have done all their K through 12 here in the US, even in the communities where they are going into higher education. So I just want everybody to kind of take a step back. And again, if we are enrolling our undocumented students as international, that's fine. But are we adding some of those barriers by putting them as international that keep them from moving forward? Or automatically, in their eyes, deny them, not by through the language, but kind of through having them kind of go through all the other obstacles. And again, it goes back to also when we code in students as international, are we blocking them from applying from institutional aid? So I want to set the stage now as far as moving forward. I'm a community organizer. I am big on community. I always tell my kids especially, like, we need to be in community because That's just how I feel. Like sometimes like we have to give as much as we can because someday we're going to be able to also receive from our community. It goes both ways, right? And I think that's really important within higher ed, or higher education, to really set that standard of building community, especially when you're working with some populations, including undocumented students. Sometimes you are going to have restrictions at your campus that are really hard to break through. That's where community is really important, both in training, creating trainings, bringing folks to train, bringing folks to support undocumented students, and bringing in folks who can be funders, who can provide scholarships to students, who can provide other paid opportunities. It's really important that regardless of what position you hold in your institution or at your campus, that those partnerships are really bringing in resources to the students that you are serving. I always encourage you guys to go and really make friends, between departments. Some of your schools are smaller than others. You guys work very differently than a larger institution. Sometimes admissions, recruitment, and financial aid is in the same office, whereas with larger ones, they're not. And so what I really want you guys to do is really work first in the interdepartmental collaboration. We need to have buy-ins for us to be able to really be successful in some of the goals that we set out. We need to have buy-in from different departments, right? So when I was working in higher education, I really got buy-in from the financial aid office. I was able to call them and go to my one or two people to ask them a question. Right. I was also, as a admissions counselor, I was also really lucky to be able to work with the financial aid director, to create an emergency grant. I was able to also work with faculty who are able to bring other resources that staff is not able to bring in, and really get buy-in from outsiders in order to support. So really start pinpointing who those individuals are that you're going to need in order not just to fundraise, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but not just to fundraise, but also to process everything that's going to come in. You need those folks that are back there in processing, the coordinators. You need those folks also at the table, and their bosses, the directors, in order to be able to move forward within your goals. Again, I keep talking about I didn't really have much say when I was in higher education, but I made sure that I made really good friends with some of those higher ups, some of those vice presidents, some of those associate vice presidents, some of the deans. I joined the Association of Latino Faculty and Students Association. I became their secretary, and in my head the whole time, I'm like, I'm gonna bring training, I'm gonna make network so that we can bring more funding into undocumented student services. So that was my goal. So I tried to use that as much as possible because I knew as just an admissions counselor, I didn't have much leverage. So I made my own leverage out there. You also want to talk to other institutions who have already set up some type of support. Whether it's really general, whether it's really surface level, it's really important when folks make strides. How did they do it? How can you do it? I want you guys to be open regardless if you're public and they were private, still hear them out. If they have more money than you, still hear them out. Because in one way or another, you're going to put what they're doing into your own context, into your own method. How can it work for us? So I want you guys to talk to other individuals, partners, even if they're not dental schools, talk to schools in medicine, even undergraduate programs that have been able to provide support. How did they do it and how can we do it just to get started? Again, you have to get the buy-in and set the precedent and build momentum. Again, a lot of times folks leave. You have to retrain people. So you want to make sure that a lot of the things that you're going to make available, and when all of these goals are set, that you're letting kind of that footprint for others to follow. You want to set that precedent at your program when new people come in. Because we've seen it. I've seen it where, yes, we're going to do all of this work for undocumented students. We've been working it for 2 years. A new dean comes in, a new president comes in. It's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. So we want to make sure that we have buy-in from a good amount of people so that when things change around our campus, we can continue with our goal setting. We're going to be sending over a document to all of you that are here today, understanding the financial landscape. So this kind of gives a little bit of hindsight on how it is that you can assess, especially if you're an advisor and you really don't work with the financial aspect of your school, how you can talk to your deans, right? This is how many undocumented students I've seen in the last year. 50% of them probably need financial aid. This is how much financial aid we need to grow or how much we need to meet in order to be able to give it away. And how can we do that? So this is a more thorough document, but this is just a little snippet of it. We're going to be sending this to you so that you can go in and start creating your task forces, creating a team that can start asking these questions and start assessing the financial landscape at your campus. One thing I want to bring to your attention is, what if you don't have undocumented students at your campus yet? What if you haven't admitted your first DACA recipient? I think this is the best time for you to start assessing all of this, because sooner or later you will have an undocumented student apply to your campus. So we want you to get started earlier than later. What we're also hoping for is that that'll give you enough time, or that'll give you more time to be able to fundraise or to find out how we can give financial aid to students. So I really want to encourage you guys to not use that we don't have a DACA recipient just yet, or we're still to accept our first student, because what I would hate to happen is that student steps into your campus and now everybody is scrambling to try to find support. We've seen it happen over and over again, where students are having to scramble, and directors and deans in order to support the student. We would like for you guys to plan out instead of being reactive. Again, you're going to get slides, these slides, and here I just wanted to give you a little bit of a kind of a example what it might look like. So maybe you are a school that your tuition is $132,000. And you are about to just accept your first DACA recipient, or you're like, yes, I think we're going to open the doors for DACA recipients, right? What does that mean? Are you able to fundraise $20,000 and give 15% in institutional aid? Are you able to raise $33,000 and give 25% or more? I also put the example for 2 students. I hope that you guys can, maybe if you have more than that, you can do the math a little bit, but this can also be a goal, right? Maybe in the beginning you cannot give 15%, it's less. But I just want to have you guys see kind of what it means to start fundraising and at what level you guys can set that goal. And I know fundraising is taxing. I know fundraising is very difficult. Trust me, when I came from higher education, as a higher ed person, I never had to fundraise for my job or for our team. When I jumped into my nonprofit role, it was kind of a big surprise that I had to fundraise at least $500,000 a year in order to keep us going. So that is one of the scariest things ever. So I know how hard fundraising is. I know the work it takes, but I really have hopes that, like, if you're in it to support, that it really is possible. Going up to bat, so I wanted to give you guys kind of some information on what I do when I have to go fundraise or educate folks or get that buy-in. It's really important that you understand the undocumented community that exists within your campus or even within the communities around. So I think what is really important is that you, whether you're a dean, whether you're a counselor, whether you're a task force, you're wanting to go bat and present at different places to bring awareness, especially for individuals that have that funding that you're desperately in need of. Sometimes you need to get buy-in from administrators, sometimes from endowment boards. Do you know if your school has an endowment? How is that funding used? And we'll talk about endowments in a little bit. Also, departments. How are you going to get other departments to support? Maybe it's not even with funding. It's just, hey, we want to open up this scholarship. We need to have financial aid on board so that they can process it. How are you going to get this buy-in? And we have some questions there for you to help you create your presentation. And I use this to create fundraisers, and I use this to talk to funders all the time. So you really want to give an overview. You may still have to educate folks on what DACA is, TPS is, and why folks don't have one of these or others, right? What does this mean for undocumented students? What does the population look like? Maybe you don't have your first student, but you want to ensure, thank you, Rocio, you want to ensure that when you do have that first student stepping into your campus, that you are prepared. You want to make sure that you understand what is being done now. Like, we've already assessed all our scholarships. We've already created a task force. We already have counselors that are really well and trauma informed. Whatever it is, the support that you guys are providing already, make sure that you make note of that. We want to add on to the resources that we are already providing students. And impact is very important. And sometimes, like, well, if we only have one student, impact doesn't go a long way. Impact will go a long way. Let us, we have a lot of alumni within our community that have gone on to do really amazing things and put their schools in the map. Our founders themselves are out there still doing advocacy, are still doing trainings. So they are doing a lot of impact within the communities, even nationwide. And really, they're always naming their schools. And so a lot of funders always want to go fund those schools because, hey, that's where they came from. So please take it, use that, acknowledge that, and how important it can be for the school. Establishing and expanding financial aid and fundraising efforts. Again, when you go up to bat, make sure that you know what your financial need is. How much do we want to raise right now? How much is important? How much is vital? How many students do we have right now? Get your students involved. I always also want to say, and if I can say this little kind of caveat, like, if you are using students to do story sharing, see if you can provide a small stipend for them, because this is a lot of labor for students to retell their story over and over. It is sometimes very hard to continue to do that. So if you can provide a stipend or fee for them to be speakers, that would be really helpful. But also include your DACA and undocumented students within the conversations. Maybe they're not the ones leading all of the efforts, but they can give you hindsight of how they're doing within your campus, in your programs. And that is a message that you can carry on to folks. So I'm going to pass it on to Rocio, who she will be talking about endowments. I know when I was in higher education, I didn't know what an endowment was. So Rocio, take it away.
Yes. So thank you for that, Yadi. Endowments are something I've been researching and trying to find like a better understanding, because I always hear financial aid, like where does our money come from other than like some state money? We have donors, we have endowment, we have like the federal money, but like endowments are basically the best way to think about it is like a mutual fund that donors will gift monies to universities, which will then be invested through it's either a affiliated nonprofit group that manages the money, or it's going to be either part of the university system itself. There When the donor does give monies, it usually falls within two different categories. The two different categories would be restricted funds and unrestricted funds. The restricted funds would be mostly for donor directed causes, such as if they have a really big interest in the arts and they want to continue funding the arts long before long after they're gone. That's a way for them to be able to continuously provide some kind of monetary income for the university. And Yadi, if you don't mind pushing on to the second slide, please. And the money's distributed in the undonor and the unrestricted funds would be monies that can be used for other expenses that aren't directly tied to a certain cause, a certain school or program. So there's multiple ways for distribution of the money to actually occur. And as of now, I know the standard payout is like 5 to 5.5% of the annual endowment. So therefore, even if a donor invests $1 million, only around 50,000 of those dollars would be available to spend, since it does keep recurring, keep going back into the it's going to go back into the annual endowment. So therefore, this is going to be like a recurring distribution of monies, and that's also where we can start questioning if a donor specifically directed certain funds to be going to an underserved population or a first generation student. If there's no outlined or outwardly said that these funds cannot be directed towards undocumented student scholarships or um, funding of books, tuition, whatever the case may be, then that's something that we can also include when we are having these conversations. How can we utilize this money that we already have, basically, and just redirect it into, or even opening it up to undocumented students? If they don't necessarily have to go directly, these scholarships, to undocumented students, but revisiting the requirements of having a US citizenship requirement or a residency requirement on these scholarships does open up the this amount of money to a whole different pool of students that may not necessarily be able to have access to these funds. So I think it's also a good thing for us to be able to like research how our monies are distributed at each appropriate campus, and start that conversation from there as well.
And sometimes I know endowments are really hard to go and pitch to, like their boards, but I think it's really worth it to just start really educating a lot of folks on what is going on. 5% may not seem like a lot, but sometimes they can just be the one pocket of money where you're dipping into to help support your efforts. And it can take time. It can take a whole year in order to get folks, even an appointment with individuals. But I really encourage you guys to keep going. The reason I wanted you guys to really push for this is because we know sometimes there's a lot of fears around DACA being taken away. It was rescinded in 2017 for many. It never came back for new applications. TPS is also always on the verge of being expired for some populations. But overall, in the last 10 years, we really have seen a lot of states progress. So a lot of licensing laws that allow for professional licensure for folks who are DACA recipients or who only have an I-10, who don't have a social security number, aka they're undocumented. A lot of these laws have gone in probably in the last 5 years. So regardless of a lot of the kind of national federal political landscape, a lot of states have been going on. I always say it, when things are in danger of being taken away, advocates are on the floor with their sleeves rolled up, really doing the work to make these state laws pass. And right now, trust me, there's a lot of organizations. I sit behind the scenes with a lot of them that are doing amazing work. And you can see on some of these maps, when you look at the map back in 2015, a lot of the map, the darker the green is or the darker the color, the more welcoming these states are to undocumented students. Right, they have in-state tuition, they have licensure, they have financial aid for undocumented students. As you can see, within the last couple of years, a lot of the states have become either a light green, or those that were already light green have become a darker green. So at the end of the day, we haven't seen nothing but progress. And let me tell you right now, there's a lot of organizations doing advocacy. So if your state is not yet a green, I'm going to tell you there are folks on the ground doing work to hopefully passing some of these laws soon, which means there's going to be more students coming into higher education. And those that are already in higher education, they're going to be coming in for their professional programs. So I want to talk about loans for a little bit. There are a lot of loans out there for students. There are students who are undocumented who have been able to successfully take out commercial loans. You'll be able to see on my slides some of the places that do offer financial loans to undocumented folks. The big caveat or the big hard piece of it all is that all of them require a US citizen cosigner. And this is something that it's great that there are loans available for undocumented students pursuing higher education. But I just want to make you guys a little bit aware of what it means when we're sending students to look for US citizen cosigners. We have students that have 3 US citizen cosigners for their loan. What this means, especially if they're US citizen, is that that cosigner is more than likely not a family member. So at the end of the day, I really want to talk, I want to kind of push for more responsible advising when we're telling students to go get loans. Students know that they can get loans. Family members, undocumented folks have been taking out loans for a long time, even without social security numbers. So they're very familiar with loans. But when it comes to school loans, the big requirement of gaining a US citizenship, a US citizen cosigner can be really detrimental and sometimes a safety um kind of a safety thing for students, especially if they're undocumented. We've seen a lot of really hard situations students have had to navigate because they've gotten a cosigner who is a US citizen. So we always encourage folks to not advise or push students to go get out loans. Let the families have those conversations. But if the students are getting loans, it's always really important for them to understand what the criteria for cosigners are. On this list, you'll be able to see some of the questions that students should be asking before they go get a loan. So feel free to share this with them or get more familiar with it. I'm happy to sit one-on-one with you and just discuss this if you're ever needing to, if you ever know that a student is going to be taking out a loan. Another thing I want to bring to your attention is sometimes these loans are really high, have high interest rates or higher than not. So this is an example of a loan a commercial loan that a student took out, the one here in the bottom. I want to put that as an example. So this student took out a loan for one of their semesters. It was $19,000. The interest rate was not too high. It was somewhere in the middle at 9%. Plus financial charges. So by the end of that loan, they were going to be owing $57,000 for that one semester. Once they were done paying with it. So we can just imagine how much students are in debt once they graduate. And I'm pretty sure you guys know that US citizens have to take out loans all the time to go through medical school. I think the hard part that I just want to bring awareness to is that undocumented students have to get that cosigner. And a lot of times that cosigner is not a family member, which can put them in really unsafe situations. We've seen it happen over and over again. So we want to be really kind of having these conversations on why institutional aid is really beneficial. Maybe they still have to take out a loan, but the amount of the loan is not as big. Here's just another quick example because I know we're running out of time. Here's just a really quick example of somebody else. This is a student who was actually accepted to a dental school here in California. She did a lot of research on which loans I can sign up for as a DACA recipient. All of these needed a cosigner. The good thing is that she had somebody who can co-sign for her. But just also make note for her, the APR was a little higher than what the minimum is showing here. So I just want to show you guys in this, you will have this list so that you can also share if necessary with individuals looking for a loan. If they're DACA recipients, what it can look like. But please make note that this was done in 2023. This is just one example from a student. Because of all of the barriers that exist, and we know it takes time to create institutional aid for students, we know that getting loans is a really scary thing. We are really grateful to partner with 2 different organizations. These are actually nonprofits that provide loans to DACA recipients. The first one is social finance. They have a wide range of degrees that they actually provide loans for students. The great thing about social finance, and we'll be sending their information to all of you, is that for them, you do not need a cosigner. Social finance will provide loans to students going into dental school. So please look into their website. We'll send the information over. If you want to be able to be introduced to them, please let me know. We can definitely do that. But especially right now, if you have a student that you know is there and you have not yet set institutional aid for them, or they're needing a loan, please let us know. We can definitely connect you with social finance. The other one is self-help. So self-help historically has been working with medical students who have DACA and are pursuing medical degree. Um, in the last year, we've loved working with them, and we brought up to their attention that we have a rise in dental school students applying for school. So self-help has really opened up their doors, and they want to support students applying to dental school with loans. So we also want you guys to look into self-help. With self-help, though, they do require a cosigner, but the great thing about self-help is that they don't require them to be a US citizen. The cosigner can actually be somebody who doesn't have a social but has an ITIN. This opens up the door so that a parent or a sibling or somebody within the family can be a cosigner. So if you're needing somebody, self-help is now opening their doors also to dental students. The big thing with self-help, though, is that they do want a partnership with the school. They do want the school to be providing a percentage of financial support to their students for the loan to be approved. We wrote a letter that we're going to be sending out to everybody that RSVP today to talk a little bit more about self-help and that partnership and what does that partnership mean. Last year, we had a student get a loan approved from self-help, but the financial office was not responding to self-help in order to be able to kind of talk about the student and how much were they were going to be able to support. So the student was not able to get the loan after all. So we really encourage you guys to open up the doors to self-help and to social finance and have these discussions to better be able to support students that are coming in. And again, a loan, it would just be one part of the funds that the student would be needing. We also want to encourage you guys to continue to set goals and fundraise. And I'll come back to that slide. But before we close shop, I want to talk about the NCC. We have a National Community Coalition where we do trainings for schools. We'll do online. If possible, we can come in and visit. We also have an annual membership where you have access to a lot of the resources. As we're gaining resources, as we're finding things out, we're researching it on a daily basis. So we're going to be sending this flyer over to you if you're ever interested in becoming a partner for us to do a presentation for you. We also have upcoming events. So this is the second one out of 5 events that we're hosting. So some of the other topics we touched on a little bit, we might go into it a little bit more in the other events. So please join us for those as well. And then we have a fundraising night. Please, please, please. As you know, we also have to fundraise to help to keep Pre-Health Dreamers going. And so please join us for fundraising night. We'll be giving out goodies to those that are donating. We have donor levels, so you'll get that flyer as well. And I know a lot of you guys are busy, and we hit the 2-hour or the 2-hour California time, but we hit the 1-hour time frame. So I understand if a lot of you guys have to go, but I am happy here. I would love to hear how your institution is doing. If you guys have set up something that you guys would like to share with everybody else so that they can learn how other schools are doing it, or how some directors have been moving forward and providing support to undocumented students. But I would love to open up that floor. I can stop recording just if that makes people feel more comfortable. Let me turn off my recording real quick. If I can figure it out, give me 1 second.